In this tutorial, we'll be looking at what we can do with strings and how they can be manipulated through escape characters. We'll be looking at ways we can break up long strings into multiple lines for easier readability of code. We'll be looking at string concatenation, or the joining of multiple strings to form a single one. And finally, we'll be looking at the concept of casting, or changing other primitive types into strings for concatenation. Just a brief review of strings and what we've covered in the previous lessons. Strings are defined by wrapping text in quotes, single or double. Strings can have a combination of both single and double quotes in order to include quotation in the string itself. I'll create a variable name, single in double, and assign it the value within double quotes. This string has single quotes within it. Now, as we've used the double quotes here, we have the ability to insert single quotes without creating two separate strings, as we would if we did use double quotes. This would throw a syntax error, as these would be referenced as variable names. So I'll just replace those again with single quotes. And we can do the inverse of that. Another variable name, double in single. This time I'm going to use two single quotes, and within them type this string has double quotes within it, and I'll set one double quote here and another here. We'll create a couple of print functions. Save this. If you need to open another command prompt, CMD in your search bar, copy full path, CD, Control V to paste. We're in our directory. Now we'll run Python main.py. I've got an error here, typo by the looks of it. Double in single. Save. And now, as you see, we've printed out both of our strings. And just for clarity, I'll clear the screen. I'll change the top single in double variable to contain only double quotes. Save, rerun the script, and we have a invalid syntax error. In Python, we also have the ability to escape characters. To insert a character that is illegal in a string, you can use an escape character. An escape character is a backslash followed by the character you want to insert. I'll just highlight all this, comment that out. I'll create a variable called escaped double quotes. And I'll assign this the value. This has escaped double quotes. Now I'm going to add double quotes around the escaped. As we previously discussed, this is invalid, but if we do add our backslash just before the double quote, we can escape it, and the same just before our next double quote. Now, as this is green within Atom, that indicates that everything should work correctly. Print save. And now we've escaped the double quotes rather than replacing them with the singles, as we've done so up here. I'll just do the inverse of what we've done here very quickly. Using single quotes. Add more single quotes around the escape, and then escape them with the backslash. Print save. And now we're printing out both of the strings that we've escaped with their respective types of quotation. If we ever need to escape our backslashes, we can do that also. We'll call this escaped backslash. And set this equal to this won't work. And then we'll add a backslash here. Now what's happening is we are escaping our last double quote. We could add another one here, but we can also escape our first backslash by using a backslash. So now we are displaying our second stated backslash and printing that out without it having affect our last double quote. We can create a new line by stating our string. And by using the escaped character of N, we can add a line break in our string. Just to clarify, I'll remove the escaped N, save, rerun. We can also use a tab escape. This is an example of using tab escaped characters. I'll print this off. Here we have our string, and we can add a tab spacing by typing \t. Now we have a tab spacing where we've indicated via our \t escaped character. There are other forms of escaped characters we can use, but for the sake of simplicity and as this is a basic tutorial, we won't complicate matters with them. We'll now look at long strings. I'll just delete this. If we have a large string within our code that we want to separate on multiple lines, we can use 3 double quotes at the beginning of the string and 3 at the end. So I'll specify 3 double quotes. I'll hit enter twice and another 3 double quotes. And anything written within these triple double quotes we can have on multiple lines. I also have to save this to a variable. Multiline variable, and we'll print this out. I've made a typo here that needs an underline. Save. I'll clear. Hit the up arrow key a couple of times. And as you can see, we're displaying our string on multiple lines. And just one thing of note regarding indentation formatting, if we remove the tab spacing here and rerun the script, you'll notice that it's right up against the edge. So that's one thing to take note. That's kind of a contradiction in what we've discussed previously with the importance of indentation within Python. It doesn't strictly apply to multi-line strings. We can also use triple single quotes and achieve the same results as double. By using string concatenation, we can also combine strings to one another. We'll concatenate 2 strings that we specify within a variable. Concatenated string will be equal to this is string 1, and after that we'll add an add sign after our last double quote and create another string, and this is string 2. Then we'll print out our concatenated string variable. Save, and you'll see that our 2 strings have been concatenated into one. Just a quick note, you'll notice we have a space here. That is because we've added one here on our first string. If I was to just delete all of that, that would be the equivalent in just one string. As long as our variables contain string values, they can be concatenated together also. We'll define 2 variables, string 1. We'll just say string 1, string 2, string 2, and I'll add a space here just to separate the 2. Now, as both of our variables contain strings, we can concatenate them. We'll create another variable, concatenated variable, which will be equal to string 1 plus string 2. We'll print this out. Save. And now we've got a single concatenated string using variables rather than strings themselves. As stated previously, we can only concatenate strings if they are strings. We can't concatenate integers or booleans or floats without first converting them to strings. Just to demonstrate that, we'll set a variable string 1 this is a string int 1, and we'll just assign this the value of 13 as an integer rather than a string. We'll attempt to concatenate them. Concatenated variable will be equal to string 1 plus int 1. We'll print it out. And now we've got the error of can only concatenate str as in string, not int to string. In order for us to concatenate numbers such as integers and floats to strings, we first need to cast them into strings by using the function str. So with our integer defined up here, we'll create another variable int to string, and then use our assignment operator and then type str, and then take our integer value of 13, which is held in int1, and convert or cast that into a string. And then we'll take our newly casted integer into a string, copy that, and replace that. So we'll be concatenating string 1, which is a string, to int to string, which will also be a string, and then we'll print off the value held within concatenated variable. Save. And we have our concatenated string. I'll just reformat that a bit better. So now this is all of the type of string. We can do this because Python is an object-oriented language, and as such it uses classes to define data types, including its primitive types. We touched on this before in our previous video, where we could display the type that was held within a variable. I'll just print the type of int1, which should display the class of integer. So we have a primitive data type basically wrapped in a class. If this is not something that you understand at the moment, that's fine. We haven't discussed classes yet, but we will in the future. Just know for now that the reason we can cast integers and booleans and floats into strings is due to the fact that the primitive data types are wrapped in a class. We can also cast floats. We'll change this to float. And we'll add a few decimal places. We'll change the name of this to float to string. And we'll replace the variable that we want to cast. We'll use our concatenated variable string1, and then we want to use float to string rather than into string, and then we want to print out the value of concatenated variable. Save. Similarly to casting our integer, we're just simply casting a float now. And finally, we can do the same with booleans. We'll call this bool. We'll set this to true. We'll redefine this as bool to string. Take our boolean value, cast that into a string. Set concatenated variable equal to string concatenated to bool to string, and we'll print this. That's just one string now. We can also combine strings and numbers with the format method. We first specify the string and place curly braces where we want to display the number, and then call the function of the variable name while passing the number as an argument. Again, this has to do with classes, so if you don't understand calling methods, that's fine. I'll just run over it briefly. We'll set a variable text equal to, this is a string displaying, then I'll write a colon and then some curly braces. Then I'll print out whatever the text variable contains, but then I'll call the format method, and then I'll type in the integer of 19. Now what this is going to do is it's going to cast the integer of 19 into the string of 19. It's going to take the string within text, look for where the curly braces are, and replace the string of 19 with the curly braces. Save. So now we have our casted integer, which is now a string displaying within our total string. It's just a tool available to you, so just keep it in the back of your mind for when you might need it in the future. Again, it's fine if you don't understand why we're using this code, but it will all become clear in the future. I'll delete all this. Now we have done a lot of casting of strings, but we also have the casting of primitive types available to us. There may be times when you want to specify a type onto a variable. This can be done with the casting of other primitive value types. Again, Python is an object-oriented language, and as such it uses classes to define data types, including the primitive types. So we have casted strings in order to be able to convert integers and floats and booleans into strings. We also have access to functions that allow us to cast other primitive types into the types that we require. We have int, which will cast a string or a float into an integer. This constructs an integer number from a float literal by removing all decimals, or a string literal, providing the string represents a whole number. I'll set a string 1. I'm just going to write a word, fail, string 2, and we'll set this to the string of a numeric value 13, a float which will say 23.555, and then I'll print the casted integer value of string 1, and we'll see what happens. I'll clear this, and we've received an invalid literal error as we can't convert fail into an integer. I'll delete that, take string 2 and print this out after we've converted it into an integer. And now we've got the integer of 13 displayed, as the string up here can be converted into an integer. take our float value, save, I'll clear this, and now we're displaying the integer value, which is a whole number, by taking our float, which has decimal places, removing those, and displaying the integer. We also have the ability to cast into a float, which constructs a float number from an integer literal, a float literal, or a string literal, providing that the string represents a float or an integer. We will print the casted value of float, and we'll use string2, and we'll add a few decimal places. I'll take this, and now we're displaying our casted value float from this string. We can also do the same with an integer. So we've added a decimal place to our casted float from the integer that we casted. Just one last thing quickly. Again, if we ever need to determine what a variable contains, we have our type function. So let's just experiment with that for a moment. We'll set a string. This is a string. Print out the type of string. We've got the class string. Now let's set the string variable to, let's change the value of this to a castable string, which 14 will work for this purpose. We'll cast it into a integer. Now we've got the class of integer. We'll change this to true. We'll set this to bool to cast the string into a Boolean value. We'll also print string. So now we have the Boolean value of true, which isn't a string as we've casted it into a Boolean, and then the class, which specifies that it's a Boolean. The main takeaways from this tutorial should be to understand that we have the ability to escape characters when we require it, that we can use triple quoted strings in order to format our code to make it more readable, understand that only strings can be concatenated together, but also that we are able to cast other primitive data types into strings in order to use them in concatenation. In our next lesson, we'll be looking at operators in terms of arithmetic and assignment.